Welcome to Veil of Shadows, Book 1, The Amulet of Shadows, by Marie Mayer. Chapter 5, The Edge, Pushes Back. They did not celebrate. The line of gray in the field had stopped, but it had not retreated. It lingered like a held breath at the boundary between green and ash. Elara stood at the study window long after Rhys had stepped back from it, her fingers resting lightly against the amulet at her chest. The metal hummed faintly beneath her skin, not loudly, not urgently, just present. "Is it draining you?" Rhys asked. She shook her head. "No, it doesn't feel like that." She searched for the right word. "It feels like standing in a current, not fighting it, just keeping your footing." He nodded slowly. "That's different from most artifacts." Yes. Most artifacts she had seen in the shop demanded something. Focus, intention, energy. Even small charms required a steady hand and measured will. This felt like a quiet agreement. She turned from the window and crossed back to the hearth. The displaced stone still lay angled outward, the recess behind it dark and empty. "We should seal it," Rhys said gently. Elara hesitated, then nodded. Together they slid the stone back into place. It settled with a muted grind, fitting as if it had never moved. The shadow pooled again at its base, unchanged, but the pulse was gone. She felt only the amulet now. "Do you still sense the other mark?" Rhys asked. She closed her eyes briefly. Yes. The carved crown in the clearing pulsed faintly at the edge of her awareness, distant, contained, and displeased. "It's still there," she said. "It knows something shifted." Rhys exhaled. "Then we shouldn't wait for it to shift again." They walked back toward the woods as the light began to thin. The square had grown quieter since afternoon, doors closed earlier than usual. Conversations lowered to murmurs. The oak at the center stood with half its leaves curled inward, gray creeping along the veins like frost that refused to melt. Elara felt eyes on her as she passed, but no one stopped her this time. At the manor's hedge, the line of blight waited. The grass nearest the house had regained a faint wash of green, color seeping cautiously back into the blades. But beyond that, the gray remained firm. A border. "Stay behind me," she said quietly. Rhys gave her a look at that but did not argue. They crossed the field slowly. With each step closer to the woods, the air grew tighter, not colder, but denser, like pressure building before a storm. The amulet warmed, not painfully, responsive. When they reached the edge of the tree line, Elara stopped. The clearing lay ahead, partially obscured by fir and bramble. The stump stood at its center like a quiet accusation. The symbol burned into its surface looked darker now, the lines deeper, and the bramble around it quivered. "They're there," Rhys murmured. She nodded. The sprites had not fled far. She stepped forward into the clearing. The moment her boot crossed the boundary, the pulse surged. It was sharper now, less patient, more insistent. The air vibrated faintly, and the bramble shook as if stirred by invisible hands. A flicker of blue shot upward, then green, then several more. They emerged in a loose spiral around the stump, wings beating too fast to follow. Their small faces tight with something no longer merely mischievous. Hostile. Elara did not reach for the shadow this time. She let her hand rest over the amulet instead. "I'm not here to harm you," she said evenly. A shrill sound answered her, sharp and layered. The sprites circled faster. Rhys remained at the edge of the clearing, not retreating, but holding position. The carved crown pulsed. The sprites reacted in unison. They darted toward her. This time, when their tiny forms entered the air around her, something shifted. The amulet flared, not bright, not blinding, a soft, steady radiance that did not cast light so much as change it. The air around Elara thickened, smoothing like water settling after a disturbance. The first sprite that crossed into that field faltered. Its wings stuttered, not frozen, slowed. The second veered sharply, as if pushed by a current it could not see. The spiral broke. The bramble shook violently. Elara felt the opposing forces clearly now. The carved symbol pulled inward, a tight knot of intent centered on the stump. The amulet responded outward, distributing, loosening. She took another step toward the stump. The sprites shrieked. The carved crown flared darkly, the lines in the wood deepening as if ink bled fresh into the grain. A sudden gust of wind tore through the clearing. Leaves ripped from branches, pine needles scattered, the gray at the clearing's edge pushed forward in a visible ripple. Rhys swore softly. Elara. She felt it too. The mark was pushing back. The amulet grew hotter against her skin, not painful yet, but strained. She placed both hands over it and closed her eyes. Not force. Balance. She let the inward pull touch her awareness fully this time. It was not mindless. It was deliberate. A gathering, a center being constructed where none had existed before. The realization struck her like cold water. This wasn't just feeding, it was anchoring. She opened her eyes and stepped directly to the stump. The sprite screamed and darted toward her face, and veered away at the last instant, repelled by the amulet's steady field. The carved crown pulsed beneath her gaze. "You don't belong here," she said quietly. The wind rose. The trees creaked. The inward pull sharpened, probing her defenses, searching for weakness, for consent. The amulet's warmth spread through her chest and outward along her arms. She placed her palm flat over the carved symbol. The wood was cold. The pulse surged violently at her touch. The inward pull tried to thread into her skin, to hook and draw. Her breath hitched. For a heartbeat, she felt the shadow within her stir in answer. The same instinctive darkness that had pooled at her feet the day before. It wanted to take, to dominate the gathering and become its center instead. No. She pressed harder against the wood. "I will not gather," she whispered. "I will not be your throne." The amulet flared, not brighter, wider. The field around her expanded, pressing outward into the clearing like a tide. The gray at the edge shuddered. The sprites froze midair, not held, but stunned, their wings faltering. The carved lines in the stump cracked. A thin fissure split the wood along the broken circle. The pulse stuttered. Once, twice, then fractured. The inward pull collapsed in on itself like breath expelled too quickly. The clearing fell abruptly still. Leaves drifted down slowly. The bramble sagged. The sprites dropped to the ground in small, disoriented tumbles. Elara stumbled back a step, breath ragged. The amulet cooled against her skin. The carved crown on the stump no longer glowed. It looked like ordinary char now, darkened wood, inert. Rhys was beside her instantly, steadying her elbow. "Easy," he murmured. She drew in a long breath. The pressure in the air had lifted. The gray line at the edge of the clearing wavered. Then, subtly, cautiously, it began to recede. Not vanish, but retreat. The grass nearest the stump regained a faint wash of green. The sprites stirred. The blue one lifted its head first. Its eyes were no longer hollow. They were bright again, wary, but alive. It hovered uncertainly in front of Elara's face. She held still. After a moment, it dipped, once, sharply, and darted back into the trees. The others followed. Silence settled over the clearing. Elara looked down at the stump. The fissure along the carved mark remained, a scar through the symbol's center. "It's broken," Rhys said quietly. "Yes." But she did not feel triumph, only awareness. This had been one mark, One anchor, placed deliberately. The inward gathering she had felt had not been wild magic. It had been structured, designed. She turned slowly toward the deeper woods. Somewhere beyond the first line of trees, the forest darkened where the sun did not quite reach. She could no longer feel the pulse there, but she sensed something else. Attention, watching. The amulet rested cool and steady against her chest, not made to rule, made to counter. And somewhere beyond sight, something that preferred to gather had just taken note of her name. Thank you for listening to the Veil of Shadows series, Book 1, The Amulet of Shadows. The story continues in the next chapter. Until then, may the balance hold.